Court Reporter with Stovall and Associates.
Good evening. Welcome to Court Reporter with Stovall and Associates. I'm your host, Mike Oglinski. It's good to be back on the air again now that we're in the political season, and as we spoke about before, actually we have Nancy Lord on tonight. She's running for District Court Judge. We've had her on the show many times, but it's always nice to have her back again. So, welcome to the show, Nancy.
Thank you, and it's good to be back on your show. I always enjoy it.
Thanks for appearing. I really am glad to have you on. You know, for those people out there who might know of you for being in the Pahrump Valley Times and the Mirror and a majority of things as far as media in this valley. But, you know, a lot of people still don't know about your background. You have a very diverse and interesting background. And, in fact, you were, at one time, a medical doctor.
Very briefly. It was my mom's idea, and it didn't work out real well. I spent a few years at Abbott Laboratories where I learned clinical research, which is still very much a part of my professional practice today. I work in patents for vitamins and medical devices and assist people with their web pages and things of that nature. After a few years at Abbott, I went off on my own and was an expert witness. And I did very well. I was traveling all over the country. There's a couple of published opinions where I'm listed not as an attorney, but as a witness. But I was only 35 years old, and I knew that I could not play off the Abbott card for the next 30 years. And since I love going to court, I went to law school. I got into Georgetown, and I graduated in 1990. I practiced for a few years in the area where I grew up, Washington, D.C., and Virginia. And then I followed my first husband, Mike Tanner of the Cato Foundation, to Georgia.
Oh, okay.
I worked with Tony Axum, a very well-renowned murder lawyer, and learned criminal law. I wanted to be a criminal lawyer because I became fascinated with criminal procedure and the Constitution, studying under folks like Sam Dash and Crattenmaker, who had been a clerk on the Supreme Court, and said to myself, you know, I'm not going to let what I did at 23 dictate my life. After a few years, I got a call from New Mexico about a food and drug indictment. I said to the lawyer, well, what do you want me to do? Move to New Mexico for, you know, pick up and move? He said, yes, that's exactly what I want you to do. Let me know what it's going to cost. I said, okay. So I loaded everybody up except my dog, who joined me later, and went to New Mexico and won a 16-count indictment.
Wow. It's
still up on the internet today. Mega Nutrients, GH3, gifts of speech. Somebody wrote my closing argument up. And it was an awesome victory, and overnight my career took off. I was hired by several big vitamin companies, including a firm in Marina Del Rey, which led to my moving to Nevada. First I started out in Vegas, but since I was spending most of my time in California, why be cooped up in a little apartment? I could have acres and have a horse. So we bought our house in 1999 on Peckstein. It burned down in 2005, and I rebuilt, now on my own, in 2008. I've been here ever since, and I love it here. After 9/11, I started a practice here because it was no longer just my home. I had to work here. And I loved it. I really admire Judge Lane. I admire Judge Davis greatly. He scared me at first, but he really does know the law. Judge Lane has an amazing ability that even when he does not rule in your favor, you leave not feeling bad. He's always kind about it. You always understand his reasoning. And I really enjoy practicing before these two judges. And that's why I'm here. I would very much be honored to work with Judge Lane and be very honored to serve on the bench that Judge Davis sadly vacated. Has it been a year and a half? Yeah.
Something like that. You know, he explained to the viewers a little bit as far as the process. And I think it's a fascinating process when, in fact, a judge dies on the bench, which is exactly what happened with Judge Davis. And I'm not quite sure how old he was, but he was certainly of the old breed in Nevada. He was probably, what, approaching 80?
I believe so. And
Something
he
like
worked
that.
right up until, I don't know how close to when he died.
I think it was almost immediate.
Yeah, I saw him, I had a hearing with him in December of 2010, I believe it was. An amazing thing about Judge Davis was even when you beat him at the Supreme Court and came back on remand, he would still give every party a chance to be heard. And that's a critical part of the judicial canons. Give the parties a chance to be heard. Yes, it's very important to be well prepared, and I will be. But I won't be making up my mind on a case until I actually have a chance to see the parties and look them in the eye and speak to the attorneys. It's very important. It's important to know the law, and it's important to have the jury trial experience. I think I missed that when we talked about how I got here and all. Even when I was working in California, I still tried cases. I have had 15 jury trials. In addition to the New Mexico case, I had another acquittal in Michigan in 1999, a mistrial in Pennsylvania. There are attorneys that go through their entire lives and never hear a not guilty in federal court. I have had 3 cases walk away without conviction, and 3 more that the government just dropped, just decided at the last minute they didn't want to do it. The rest, of course, were resolved, and there were hundreds of them. I've also had about 15 family law cases. Very important in family law that you relax the rules of evidence. You don't tell people you got to bring in the custodian of records from the bank. They can testify to their own bank records. It's right in the statute. You can testify to the value of your own home. People in a family law case are not big corporations. They're struggling to pay their legal bills, and you give them a chance to get the evidence before the court without going through a lot of hoops. When the life of a child is at stake, you want to know everything there is to know about that case. And that's the way I will rule. I can't say how I will rule on a specific case, but I can talk about general policies, administration. Important that when there's an emergency, it be heard as an emergency, not set out 3 weeks in advance to fester and turn into a disaster. Parties being heard. I think the county could benefit from a grand jury system. As a federal defender, I worked with grand juries all the time, not directly with the grand jury, but with the evidence obtained from the grand jury, and it was a lot deeper and more informative than what we get out of the preliminary hearings here in Nevada. Jury trial experience. I find it very disturbing that the governor would appoint an attorney who has never taken a case to the jury. The jury is a fundamental part of our entire democratic process. It goes back 500 years to the trial of William Penn back in London. William Penn, as you probably know, was charged with preaching an unauthorized religion, and the jury was told, find him guilty. Well, they said no. They were sent back again. They were held without food and water. Find him guilty. Eventually, 5th or 6th time, the judge finally gave up and just fined him and said, well, you can get out of jail when you pay it. And Mr. Penn got out on the first writ of habeas corpus and came to America, where the jury trial became an essential part of our criminal system. The judge to the jury is the most important person in that room. The wrong look, the wrong comment, the wrong joke can sway a whole case. For a jury to just look at a defendant who's, say, on the stand, like she doesn't believe him, would make the jury not believe him. A judge must be calm, unbiased, prepared, of a calm demeanor. The power is not in the person. It's in the office. It's in the bench. It is not the place to bring your views to the fore. Fortunately, I've had my chances. I've had my days in the sun. I was a commentator on CNN for 10 years. I've run for mayor. I've run for vice president. I ran for district attorney. The bench is not the place to make your points. It's the place to apply Nevada law fairly, justly, knowledgeably, and calmly, and not to run on about how much power you have, and not to bring your own ideas into how a case should be resolved. Party A wants this, Party B wants that. You can rule for Party A, you can rule for Party B, you can split it. You can say, well, I rule for you on this, and I rule for you on that, but you can't say, no, you're not going to do it that way. I want you both to work together. That's not within the rights of a judge.
We're going to take a quick first break, and then we'll come back and talk about the judge's position as a proxy between the constituency or the peers and also between the legal system. So we'll be right back, and we'll be back with Nancy Lord, who's a candidate for district court judge.
Court Reporter with Stovall and Associates. Court Reporter with Stovall and Associates.
Everything in that, every piece
Hi,
of paper
we're back
was
with Court Reporter
generated.
with Stovall and Associates. I'm your host, Mike Glinski. Again, our guest tonight is Nancy Lord. She's a candidate for district court judge here. And in fact, before we went to the first break, we were talking about the judge's role in the courtroom and, in fact, in helping the jurors to interpret the law. So I did cut you off a little bit, but I think it's important to expound upon, well, really, what is the role of the judge in the courtroom?
Okay, the jurors do not interpret the law. The jurors make findings of fact.
Right.
They decide the facts. There was a time in this country and in a couple of states where the jurors could decide the law, and that got rid of some very bad laws like alcohol prohibition. I have been credited with, quote, nullification cases. I don't accept that credit. I always gave my juries a reason to acquit. First, you must make them want to acquit, and then you need to give them a legal reason to acquit as a defense attorney. But the jurors need to understand what it is they have to find out and what they can determine if they find, if you find that this, then you can rule that. You never should be saying you must convict. It's always you may convict. The juries always have the opportunity not to convict if something about the case bothers them. But there is a lot of different instructions, and there are different rulings that the judge must make during the course of the trial, because there are some types of evidence that are more prejudicial than helpful. An article that somebody else wrote about the case that means nothing to it. Hearsay. There's many things that do not come in, and it's up to the judge to decide what does come in and what doesn't come in. There's arguments that can't be made. For instance, an attorney in closing argument can never comment on why a criminal defendant did not take the stand. That goes back to a case where a prosecutor argued, well, he can tell you why the blood was on the stairs, and he can tell you why the knife was found. Reversed. And my concern with this appointment is that something big is going to get reversed. I'm surprised that the sheriffs did not endorse me, because by lacking the knowledge of criminal law, by never having done any criminal law, a mistake will be made. We have a very good and fair Supreme Court, and somebody very evil is going to walk because of a mistake.
Let me ask you this. One of the things I think is always interesting in a small community, in Nye County very much, you have a very powerful position, district court judge, not only, as you were in a metropolitan, but really here, you're very much even a political figure, even if you chose not to be.
Yeah, right.
I always thought it was interesting to speak to the candidates about, having to make rulings in criminal situations and civil situations, and also having to go to, say, for instance, Tonopah in your instance. How does that play into really navigating the responsibilities you would have as a district court judge if elected?
Well, I was told you only go there once a month, but I have no problem with it because a lot of people don't know where Pahrump is. When people get arrested on one of the outlying areas, Eureka City, Hawthorne.
Right.
They know that it's not anywhere near Reno and it's not anywhere near Las Vegas, and they see Pahrump and they call me. So I've had several cases out in the boonies, and I love it. I love going to the little hotels, eating at the little, cowboy coffee shops. I know some of the judges and DAs around the outlying areas. I'd like to own some land out there one day. It's absolutely not a problem for me.
No, again, as far as, and one of the things I'd like to touch on again would be, having to have a docket full of criminal and civil issues. How important is experience in both those areas?
It's very important, and I do have civil experience. My civil defense record is excellent. None of my defense cases have had to pay more than $1. And that was on an OJ that my client made at my suggestion, because we popped the plaintiff as being a vexatious litigant. And I said, if you let this go on, he's going to have to ask permission from the court if he wants to sue anybody else. Well, he was more concerned with being able to sue more people than suing my client.
That's pretty funny.
Yeah, and I've had 2 others that, were oversight cases where the insurance companies paid everything and my clients were left off the hook.
Your practice today is, and I know this because we have a personal relationship, but your practice today is very narrow in being, well, in my opinion, fairly narrow, because you have a highly specialized practice of law as far as intellectual property, and it's pretty much geared towards pharmaceuticals, if I understand.
Not pharmaceuticals, nutraceuticals and medical devices.
That's way over my head.
Yeah.
So anyway.
And it's not really that narrow. I do other kinds of cases. That's the area that I promote on the internet.
Right.
Because the other stuff just comes in without it.
Sure.
So to get my patents and get my 510Ks and get my website reviews, I need the web page. My criminal work and my civil work just comes in on word of mouth.
My question is, because of the specialty that you've kind of have created for yourself, and that gives you the ability to practice law elsewhere, but still remain in Pahrump.
Right.
And was that a choice, a personal choice, because you've liked living here, or is it just because it's a central location? I mean, I'm kind of trying to. What I'm asking you, why are you still here if you could go anywhere? Seriously.
Because this is where I chose. I was in Georgia because my first big win was in New Mexico. And I had it was only 2 years after I ran for vice president on the Libertarian ticket. I had joined the party in 1988 after hearing Ron Paul, and I've actually had the honor of being on TV with Congressman Paul back in 1989, 1990, something like that. I had connections all over the country, so I could live anywhere. And I just popped around and decided where I wanted to live. I'd always loved Nevada. I had another one of my wins was up in Reno. It was a jury tampering case where my client had been involved or alleged to be involved in passing out jury nullification brochures outside the courthouse. And she did a great job on one of the big TV shows, and that case kind of went away. It was dismissed with like a little community service or something like that. But I loved Nevada, so I decided, I can live wherever I want. I had a season where everything I was about to try was dismissed. Big federal cases. I had my whole spring planned out, and the federal government just boom, boom, boom. After the jury tampering, there was another big nutritional supplement, 24-count FDA indictment with 2 defendants. Both of them were dropped. I said, well, now's my chance.
Right.
And I just did it. Like I said, I started out in Las Vegas, but wanted to live in the country. It's a great place to live if you have a national practice because you can get to an airport that has connections everywhere. I would have gone to Albuquerque, but there were no flights out after 6 o'clock at night.
That's true. And I'm not asking, it's certainly not a slight on the town. I happen to love this area very much. But I do think it's important that when people are running for public office, and very much a localized office, because you'll be sitting on the bench here and also in Tonopah, it's important to have a love for the community. And like I said, although it's not a political position, in a lot of ways it is. So that being said, you have been very politically active of late, and you also had a couple of controversial things you've been involved with, and we're going to hit on those in our last segment. So we're going to take our second commercial break, and we'll be right back with judicial candidate Nancy Lord.
Court Reporter with Stovall and Associates. Court Reporter with Stovall and Associates.
Welcome back to Court Reporter with Stovall and Associates. I'm your host, Mike Uglinski. We're in the final segment with judicial candidate Nancy Lord. And in fact, before we broke for the break, we were talking about some of the things that you've been involved with in the past. The one that's really the most significant one, in my opinion, was your run for the district attorney's office. It was a very controversial race. We had many candidates come in with diverse backgrounds. The incumbent seeing a weakened position, and in fact, I think that brought quite a few of the candidates in. You did quite well. One of the things that was a real controversy was, in fact, some of the exit polling that was done. So I'd like for you to address, tell us what happened with that and where it sits today.
On the exit polls, I was way ahead. Now, we were doing it in my area, right on, Basin and 160, which was the heart of my base, right near where the detention center was up. And it really did look like I won. Statistically, it didn't make sense, so we got permission to go and look at the rolls and look at the absentee ballots. I actually did win on Election Day, but only by 20 votes. And Mr. Kent had a lead from the early voting. But I had the opportunity to look at everything, every absentee ballot, every early ballot, every signature, everything there. We put up on a spreadsheet, and there were some little mistakes, like someplace where Mr. Beckett got 7 votes instead of 8. But there was nothing, absolutely nothing, that would indicate a fraud or a conspiracy. The interesting thing about the election is that the way people voted had nothing to do with the people that were friendly with each other. There were a couple of candidates that I was kind of on the same side as. People didn't vote for me in them. They might have voted for me and Scott Coble. They might have voted for Ron Kent and Ray Mallow. They just almost like a random choice, or that they simply voted for who they liked, which is fine. If you were to see a fraudulent race, you'd see blocks of voting for 1 or 2 people. It didn't happen that way. I just lost. I lost by a little. I lost against a guy that had hundreds of huge signs all over the place, that had the support of all the political people in town, but I did lose, and that's okay. I'd like to address that, though, for a minute in terms of this seat. I did not seek the appointment because, as Mike was saying, I have a different type of practice. I don't have the kind of practice that I can just put an ad in the paper and start it all up again. I'd have to blow off companies I've worked with for years, in some cases 10 years. But more importantly than that, I want to be elected by the people. I find it very disturbing if I were a criminal defendant or someone on a petition for a review on a zoning issue or a gaming license issue, to be before a court whose allegiance is to the state, the government, the political people. That is a really scary thought, and I don't want to be one of those judges. I want to be a judge who was put there by the people who she's going to rule for or against. Judge Davis once said to me, those little cases that, have more effect on the people you represent than the corporate law that you lawyers are so enamored of. And he's absolutely right. When you have a custody dispute, a dispute over the little bit of assets left in a divorce, a business dispute where it's a small business, a probate issue, an accident, these cases are critical to those people. And I want to be a judge for the people. I don't want to be put there by some politician.
I think you bring up a very valid point when you discuss that. And, and it's funny because you're right. In the legal world, people do become enamored with the idea of having the large institutional clients and, this kind of what we always call white shoe lawyering.
Yeah.
And I think that as far as a judicial candidate, although you, like I said, very powerful position, you are touching many lives. One of the things that I also asked our past guest, Charlie Watkins, who's running for Justice of the Peace, it seems to me that you probably would have a large amount of cohesion amongst the people in front of your bench and yourself, because it's a small community in a lot of ways. In your opinion, does that, although you can recuse yourself in these cases, how does that play into the day-to-day operations? Having such a small community, and we probably be talking, or you probably be making rulings on neighbors, friends. I guess not friends.
You have to put that aside. If they're so close that you're not going to be able to be fair, then you do need to recuse. And Judge Lane has recused himself on several of my cases because he knew the parties. I don't recall Judge Davis having to do that. Judge Davis did a very good job, even though he was very nice and very a caring man. He did not get so close in the community that he had a bias. He didn't go to the Republican events. He didn't go to the, he wasn't seen at all the political events. For one thing, he lived in Tonopah. I'm not into that either. I don't go running around with, rubbing shoulders with all the politicos. It doesn't do anything for me. And I think as a judge, while it's not required under the canons, it's certainly a good idea. There was a case out of Florida recently where a judge was actually reversed because one of the attorneys on a case was on her Facebook page. Now, my opponent has one of the sheriffs, the assistant sheriff, on her Facebook page. It was held as not being a problem. They have a right to have a life. But I would be very uncomfortable as a criminal defendant if I found the judge's Facebook page had the DA on it. Right. I don't have a Facebook page, and I'm not going to get one. And I don't think I'm even going to get one in the unlikely event that I lose this. I expect I have my webpage, and I can control what's on it, and nobody can write in and ask to be my friend.
Well, not speaking about political groups, but social causes in a way. And you also had a personal interest in this, but you garnered a lot of attention when you rallied against the detention center. Talk a little bit about that.
Right, well, the detention center was done wrongly. There were no valid scoping meetings. The meetings were paved meetings. We found that out for sure years later at a deposition on Harley's case. It was simply their regular monthly meeting where they put a little ad in the paper that said Las Vegas Area Detention Center. Only 2 people realized that meant Pahrump, because obviously it was in the Pahrump Valley Times. They said, why is this ad here? It wouldn't have held up. My problem was because of my own good heart. Even though the requirements to get attorney's fees out of plaintiffs in a case against the government are very, 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 very tough, I didn't have enough experience in NEPA to take the chance, and I sought out plaintiffs that did not own property. Well, to have standing in a case like this, it's best to own property and own property near the site. And the CCA lawyer told me, why are you doing this? You clearly have standing. You're only 2 miles from it. Well, my standing got even stronger when the road caved in right at the end of my own street. So I did put myself in as a plaintiff, and one other brave soul up on the fan put himself in as a plaintiff. But because I was so meticulous about not wanting anybody in who owned anything, they're still scared. And now at this point, there's no way the case is frivolous. The entire Las Vegas bench has been recused because the courthouse had an interest in it, and there were emails to Judge Hunt from the U.S. Marshal Service about the progress of the contracting. We used cases like Nichols as precedent, and Judge Pro agreed that there was the appearance of impropriety. We now have Judge David Ezra, and he's held this case now for almost a year, but this judge is probably scratching his head saying, well, why don't we have more plaintiffs? You know, I think if I had 50 people on that case, that thing would be shut. The OFDT the contract would be nullified.
So you will continue to fight the fight, even if in fact you were to take the bench. And I'm sorry, this is going to have to be a short answer because we're out of time. We always talk too long.
As an attorney, I cannot. As a plaintiff, I can, and I will continue.
Okay. Well, thanks again for being on tonight. And I'm sure we'll have you come along. I love having you as a commentator for current events things too. So we'll see you soon enough. And we do appreciate you watching tonight. Miss Lord, I know, is going to be becoming more active in her campaign soon enough. So I don't think there's anything up yet. But if you want to reach her, you can always call our office. We'll be able to put you in touch with any of the guests on the show. Again, thanks for watching tonight, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you very much, Mike.
You're welcome.
Court Reporter with Stovall and Associates.